The Doomslayer is back with a vengeance in Doom: The Dark Ages. This feudal-flavored first-person frenzy promises revamped combat and revitalized visuals for current-gen consoles and PCs. In broad strokes, it's a technical success. But how does the game fare across Xbox Series, PS5, and PS5 Pro? Are there any unexpected devils hiding in the details? The Dark Ages is an excellent-looking game on consoles. There's something so satisfying about the raw visual feedback you get when blasting away demons. Chunks of flesh are blown off in an evolution of the destructible demon system from Doom Eternal. Particles bloom and dance as foes are shot and lit aflame. Bits of the environment disintegrate into physicalized pieces, ripped apart by the wide spread of weapons like the pulverizer. And all of this generally runs at 60 FPS on every machine, with excellent per-pixel motion blur to keep things buttery smooth. When you stop to smell the roses though, Dark Ages continues to excel visually. Doom's artwork is top-notch, and the rendering systems used to support that artistic vision really deliver. Expect intricate PBR materials, plenty of environmental geometry, and excellent RTGI-based lighting that makes the game look consistent across a wide range of lighting conditions. It's a top-notch effort that deserves considerable praise, especially considering that the scope of the game has been expanded a lot since Doom Eternal, with titanic mech sections, wide-open dragon combat, and larger on-foot gameplay arenas with more foes. John will have more details on what makes Dark Ages tick in his coverage to come, but I came away suitably impressed by what the game has to offer. It feels like a considerable evolution above recent idTech titles, and offers an unparalleled demon-destroying experience. In terms of platform-specific details, let's start with the two Xboxes. I've been demonstrating Series X footage so far, and Series X does deliver a pretty credible version of the game in its sole visual mode. I believe we're looking at a dynamic 1440p resolution here, dropping down to around 1080p in busier scenes. Variable rate shading also appears to be employed, in common with other idTech games on current-gen consoles. Image quality is fine enough, though it can be a touch soft at times and the VRS can be unflattering. In terms of visual settings, I didn't find the game wanting, except perhaps for the lack of ray-traced reflections, which are featured on PC and seem relatively light, even on console-caliber GPUs. The Series X relies on more primitive reflections tech, leaning heavily on screen space reflections. Also, there's some occasional harsh shadow pop-in, which is more obvious in larger levels. Performance is more or less perfect in my testing. Even in intense gameplay, we're looking at a locked 60 FPS update without dips. It's possible the game could drop frames, of course, especially in later sections, but in my gameplay I only saw a clean 60 FPS update. There do appear to be duplicate frames on camera cuts though in cutscenes, which is a common artifact across the consoles. The object and camera motion blur works here to greatly enhance the perception of fluidity, and it comes with multiple intensity settings to suit different tastes, including the option to turn it off entirely. I used the default high setting for my capture in this video. There are other visual tweakables here, even though there's only one visual mode. Toggles for depth of field and chromatic aberration are present, as is a slider to toggle the game's sharpening. I don't think the sharpening slider is working consistently in this version though, as changing its values doesn't actually appear to change anything on screen. There's also a slider for field of view, but this doesn't appear to work on Series X, at least not consistently. A toggle for film grain would have been welcome as well, but it isn't present here for some reason, though it does appear on PC. Dark Ages has a rather strong film grain that is easy to spot in darker regions of the image, and it can't be turned off on any console. I don't think anyone was particularly expecting a bad experience on Series X, but the much weaker Series S is much more of a concern. It's mostly a similar enough experience, just a very soft one. Series S peaks at about 900p in my counts, again with VRS appearing to be in use, with dips to about 648p in heavier scenes. Expect a blurrier image with a smeared appearance on fine geometry and textures. At close range, fidelity on a 4K panel can look pretty rough, and image stability is decreased as well. The UI is also lower res. Other differences stem from visual settings tweaks. Foliage density is reduced, for instance, especially at a distance. Note how this distant plateau is flora-rich on Series X, but is totally bare on S. Some LODs have also been altered, like with this demon's spine in the distance. Note the VRS chunks here as well. Their impact can be quite severe at times. The game's textures and materials have seen some light tweaks here too, though any concessions here are pretty minor up close. The frosted glass in this shot, a Doom 2016 staple, appears blurrier, though that effect may be resolution dependent. GI quality appears to be downgraded, with a somewhat less defined depiction of light occlusion around complex structures. First-person weaponry is also impacted by indirect lighting changes, as we can see on the shotgun here. Volumetric lighting is low resolution, and shadow maps also tend to be coarser and more aliasing prone. Low-lying volumetric fog also proves a bit rougher. There are some other changes too, like how the depth of field is somewhat shallower in cutscenes, which may be driven by resolution changes. Overall though, it's a fairly feature-complete Series S version, at least for a boundary-pushing current-gen game. Most of the little details, like these screen space shadows, are still present at close distances. Ray tracing is still part of the feature set and looks handsome enough, and visual settings in general remain reasonable. It's just conveyed through a low-res, VRS-stricken haze. Performance is not quite as good as Series X. The great majority of gameplay still runs at 60 FPS, thankfully, but there are dips, particularly in larger gameplay spaces. This open-air fight at the outset of level 6 is a good example, with many dips into the 50s in this sequence. Expect similar results during this interior face-off in level 2, which is unexpectedly heavy. I didn't have time to get as far in Dark Ages as I'd like, but I would expect similar behavior in other taxing fights. Series S also suffers from some screen-tearing artifacts near the top of the screen, which present oddly and aren't possible to track with our tools. These aren't terribly noticeable, but you can spot them if you go hunting for them. It's possible Series X has similar behavior, but it doesn't drop frames nearly as often, if at all, so there would be little opportunity to witness them. The two PS5s are a little more straightforward. Base PS5 players can expect a similar visual experience to their Series X compatriots, with largely equivalent settings across the board. The biggest difference I noticed came in the 6th level, where most of the trees don't animate with the wind on Series X, but do animate on PS5. Their shadow maps also move on PS5, of course, though this does exacerbate aliasing slightly. Foliage placement also differs slightly on PS5. Outside of those tweaks, I didn't spot any obvious visual settings differences between the two consoles. Expect more or less identical shadows, textures, distant LODs, and ray tracing detail. The FOV slider actually does appear to work consistently on the PlayStation consoles, however, though the sharpening slider remains ineffective. Image quality between the two machines is again similar. Most scenes look very close, though Series X is on net a touch sharper. Interestingly, the PS5 also appears to use a form of VRS, as it has distinctive blocky artifacts in the image, though this is presumably software VRS. Unfortunately, the omnipresent film grain makes it a little tougher to see some of the finer details. Resolutions are pretty similar to Series X in demanding content at around 1080p, and again it tops out around 1440p, but I think PS5 typically comes in a little lower than Series X. Performance is a little curious. Here, the PS5 drops frames regularly during demanding encounters, our two stress points in levels 2 and 6, and during some less challenged fights as well. The overall framerate fluidity is lower than Series X by a good margin, and actually feels a bit lower than Series S. Most gameplay still flies by at 60, but it's definitely in the 50s more often than I'd like to see, especially considering the impeccable performance of its Microsoft counterpart. But unlike Series S, the PlayStation consoles don't tear at the top of the screen when they do drop frames. PS5 Pro is a fairly straightforward upgrade over the base console. Expect a more or less total match in visual settings with PS5. That's not necessarily a bad thing, though some selective settings bumps might have been interesting. Instead, image quality gets boosted somewhat with a new 1800p target. It looks a bit sharper than the PS5's 1440p target, and the size of the VRS blocks is substantially reduced. More demanding scenes take you down closer to 1296p or so. TAA treatment appears similar to the other machines, so there's no PSSR or similar upsampling in effect here. This is probably one of the less exciting Pro upgrades we've seen in recent AAA fare. Frame rates are generally good here, with a stable 60 FPS in most content, but those two particularly demanding combats still provoke minor frame rate dips, which isn't ideal. It's no major concern and performance is better than PS5 by a good margin, but Series X remains king. Doom: The Dark Ages didn't make the best first impression on me. The game strips out the double jump and double dash from Eternal, which can make it feel less dynamic and exciting. There was something so delightful about the movement tech in Eternal that doesn't really translate to Dark Ages, and it takes some time to adapt to the new reality. Plus, the first few missions dole out new tech and weapons at a pretty slow pace. But after a few hours practicing the blocking and parrying paradigm, Dark Ages proves a highly satisfying game in its own right. Blocking feels fairer than trying to simply evade every enemy attack, which doesn't provide the same intuitive feedback. Many combat elements return from Eternal, but more of the basic combat tech has been made universal, like the new Shield Bash ability, which replaces the super shotgun hook from Eternal. Dark Ages moment-to-moment combat is some of the absolute best in any modern single-player FPS, and it takes place in more open levels with good variety in enemy encounters, which is a nice break from the arena-focused, wave-based combat of the two prior Doom titles. Based on my history with the series, I can easily imagine spending dozens and dozens of hours with this game. John and Alex will be offering their respective opinions on the PC release in due course, but so far the console versions are in relatively solid shape. Visual settings are good across the board, and the image quality is reasonable on everything but Series S. Performance is a little odd, insofar as every machine but the Series X seems to suffer from substantial dips in more challenging fights, though 60 FPS is still achieved the great majority of the time. Series X also crashed for me at one point, and I ran into a bugged checkpoint at one time on Series S that required a level restart. These aren't big issues, and typically Dark Ages is a really satisfying experience on PS5 and Xbox Series, but they do warrant patching. So Doom: The Dark Ages is a superb shooter that is well worth your time on console systems, minus some small current quirks. This is one of the best action experiences I've had in recent years. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and press the bell for YouTube notifications. Check out the Patreon at digitalfoundry.net for exclusive and early access content, and to get in touch, use social media. Thanks for watching.